Welcome to Equitable Minds, a monthly podcast focusing on pertinent issues in the U.S. educational system and our society today. We bring attention to concerns in areas such as educational leadership, school and community, innovation in education, research to practice, and social and cultural challenges in schools. We invite experts, educators, and community members to discuss challenges and present solutions. I'm your host, Dr. Floyd Beecham, Bennett Professor of Urban School Leadership at Lehigh University. For our listening and viewing audience, we have a special treat today. Today, as our guest, we have Dr. Chance Lewis. Dr. Lewis is the Carol Grotnes, let me make sure I got that right, and Belk Distinguished Professor of Urban Education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He's also the Executive Director of the Urban Education Collaborative at UNC Charlotte. Dr. Lewis has over 100 publications, including more than 70 refereed journal articles in the leading academic journals in the field of urban education. He has authored, co-authored, or edited 30 books. We are delighted to have you here today. We want to welcome Dr. Lewis. And as we were just saying, Dr. Lewis and I go way back to the early 2000s, maybe. But we've known each other a long time. And let me just be the first to say, it is just a blessing to see how your career has blossomed over the years and to see you doing these great things. Right now, the fruits of your hard work and labor is it's amazing. It really is. Welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Beecham, for having me. I'm honored to be here. Anytime you call, I will make time to be here with you as well. So it's just an honor and privilege to be here, and just honored and blessed to share this time with you as well.
All right. So I guess we got some questions and some things we want to get to, right, Jalissa?
Yeah, I think I'll start. So can you share with us your background?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from the great state of Louisiana, born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and growing up between Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and New Orleans, Louisiana, kind of shaped my upbringing at that particular time. Also, I always like to say, given my educational experience as a student, during that particular time, I graduated from high school, and many people in education will know what I'm talking about when I say this. I graduated from a school where you say the name of the school, people will say, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." Right? So that's the school I actually graduated from as well. So by many education kind of academic barometers, I'm definitely not supposed to be here because my address was wrong. My family makeup was wrong, and all the things that we consider are right in education, I didn't have those checked in the appropriate check boxes. But that goes to show the power of education and the power of great educators, in my pathway who stepped in to shape me into who I am today. So my background really drives the work that I do now in urban education, because I'm not teaching and writing and all the other things that I'm doing now about something that I just got an interest in. I'm really just talking about my life, now at this particular stage, and how I grew up, and is using the platform now to, make a pathway for other people as well. So my background is really tied to answer your question, is a mark of the great things that go on in places in the education sphere that are usually counted out as well. So that shapes me into who I am today.
Dr. Lewis, as you answer that question, it made me reflect back on my own upbringing, and as you think about the statistics and the numbers, how the numbers are against you coming from some of these communities. I come from the east side of Saginaw, Michigan, where in places where, like you said, there are communities that are undervalued, counted out, forgotten in many cases. So in certain ways, you're right, it is pretty amazing, to reach these heights. But education, of course, I think you're right, was the key.
Yeah.
Um, and on top of that, and if you make it out of a hole, it's always good to hand the next person a rope,
That's
you
right.
know,
That's right.
Absolutely.
as opposed to a shovel.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important because as we look at, backgrounds of many students, you think about, how many people get counted out, before they even are done even navigating, you know what I mean? And that happens all the time, even today, where people just are counted out and just because of who they are, where they come from. So, I'm glad our stories are similar in the fact of, how the power of education is real and that those power of those educators in those schools that, teach students like I was, each and every day. That's the power of it.
And this is interesting. You mentioned the schools. So, what made you decide to go into education? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience with K-12 teaching.
Yeah. So what made me go into education? I mean, it's very interesting now that I kind of think back on it because how I talked about my background of how I didn't meet the check boxes, from educators. But what was interesting though, I was still during that time a third generation person in my family to go to college, right?
Mm,
But my immediate family situation growing up was not, the typical at that particular time. And so I came from a family of educators. Actually, my grandfather was the first dean of education at Southern University,
mm,
a historically Black college where I went to
mhm,
college as well. And grandmother, mother were teachers as well. So I came from a line of educators, but in typical fashion of what any kid would do, I said, I'm not doing that because no way, no how. I fought against
Mhm.
that. So even when I graduated school, I said, I'm not majoring in education. I'm a major in chemistry and with life being how it is, you find your way to your destiny. You know,
mm,
Yeah.
ultimately end up switching majors, and then decided to go ahead and go into education because even when I was in the chemistry major, I found myself, even through tutoring and stuff like that, always bringing people together, what I mean, to teach them something, right? And then so ultimately decided to become an education major at that particular time, and um, taught went on the pathway for secondary education and end up teaching high school as well at another school. When you say the name of the school, people say, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." Right. And so I taught at that school as well. And I was fortunate enough in my fourth year of teaching to receive Teacher of the Year for the state of
mhm,
Louisiana
mm,
at that particular time. So,
mhm.
so it was destiny, going in education. I tried to fight it. I just didn't want to do it, but it happened. So, yeah.
And is it is eerily similar, man. I sit here and listen to you talk, man. My mom was also a teacher.
Yeah.
I went to a historically Black college. I went to Alabama State University,
Hmm.
and I too, majored in business administration
Yeah.
for 1 year. Now,
Hmm.
it just came to me a little faster, and by
Right.
by my by my sophomore year, I realized, what, I kind of like history and social studies. So I ended up going into social studies education, and that was it.
There you
Been
go.
been in it ever since. But our stories mirror in these interesting ways that I didn't. I kind of remembered some of this, but to
Yeah.
hear it again now, I'm like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's actually amazing when you kind of really think about it as well. So, but we thank goodness we found our pathway to where we needed to be, as well. And I know for me, and I'm sure similar to you, it has definitely informed, many of the things
Mhm.
that I have done and are currently doing as well.
Mhm.
So,
I I was thinking about listening to both of you and your paths. It's similar to mine. I will be, God willing, when I finish,
And
will
you
be
will.
the
you
first
will.
person. Oh, from your mouths to God's ears,
There
will
you
be
go.
the first person in my family to get a doctorate. I
Mhm.
think I'm the first person in my family to get a master's.
Mhm.
And I think I might be one of the first women
Mhm.
to get a college degree.
Wow.
So
Excellent.
yeah, for me, I think that led me to the pathway, where I am right now. I worked all the way from preschool, believe it or not, through college. And I think education is so important.
Yes.
And education opens
Mhm.
doors.
Mhm.
And, I was groomed as a child to um, take care of, you know, family members, children. I was being groomed to be a housewife. And I
Mhm.
don't mean that in a bad way.
Right.
I was a
Right.
stay-at-home mom for a few years while my kids were little, and I would not trade it for the world. But I was groomed. I wasn't groomed to get an education. I wasn't groomed to, you know, work outside the home. And it was because culturally at that point in time, not anymore, but at that point in time, that was my that was my parents' reality. That was
Right.
what their reality was. So they were trying to set me up for their
Mhm.
own reality, not
Right.
knowing that, they were moving us here from Puerto Rico and it was just going to be a totally different experience.
Mhm.
Yes.
And it's so funny
Mhm.
now because now my parents are the ones who are like, "Are you done yet? When are we going to this?" And
That's right.
so, they're really proud. But and when I was young, it was difficult. I
Mhm.
had to fight against the grain, go
Mhm.
against it, go against what my family's thought of who I should be, what I should do, go against all of that just to get an education. And so my hope is that it's not as difficult for people that come after me.
Mhm.
So for my children, I want it
Yeah.
to be less difficult. For any student that interacts with me, I want to help them have it be less difficult. Not
Right.
that it won't be difficult because we all
Mhm.
experience challenges, but have it be less difficult than, whatever I may have gone through. So that's my goal in education.
Mhm. All
Yeah.
right.
It's amazing the stories and the navigation to where we get to as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to ask you, so let's talk a little bit about the pandemic.
Sure.
So the pandemic brought to the forefront the inequities in access to education, especially for students of color, students with disabilities, and students of low socioeconomic status.
Mm.
During the initial shutdown, school leaders in K 12 and higher education grappled with providing students internet access, computers, so that they can access their education from home. How has your work and life changed coming out of the pandemic? And also, what changes have you observed in K 12 schools?
Yeah. So great question. I'll start with the latter question about
Okay.
the K-12 side first. In looking at the observation of that, as horrible as the pandemic was, um, I'm a person that looks for kind of a silver lining. And one of the things as I examine K through 12 education and schools that I've worked with, not only here in the state of North Carolina but around the country, uh, education was forced to really push toward innovation really
Mm.
quick. They had no other choice, right? And so, if there's a silver lining, they had to figure out new ways to do what they do as well. So, one of the things that the pandemic taught them that many of us in education knew already, but was this unequal access to things that people take for granted. So once everybody had to figure out how to navigate, of course, the haves versus the have-nots and access issues were front and center for everyone to see. What, no matter income level, no matter no address or what have you, because what ended up happening as a part of that is that one, a new appreciation for teachers and school leaders were in place because now they had kids at home all day, right? And so as we start to look at that, it forced education to be innovative. But when we look at some of the issues related to access, internet access, and things like that, when I said the have and the have not and the resource issue was front and center, one of the things we saw from, for many students of color, and low income students and all the other students that you mentioned in the question was that you had a group of students who could easily break out their devices, get on the internet, and be ready for learning, right? But then you had another group, which was a huge segment of the population, was trying to access education through a cell phone, right? And navigate whatever course management software, whether it be Canvas, Blackboard, or whatever the school was using, or they weren't using any, and then they tried to jump on there to do it, right? So
Yeah.
you think about the difference between having multiple devices out versus trying to access school from your parent's cell phone, right? And so as you start to think about that, education had to be innovative for delivery purposes as well. So I think the pandemic taught the field of education now, as I sit back and kind of look at it, is that they really had to up their game on making sure students had access to education. And the reason why that was important, because they had to, if they were going to get funding. And, and I'm a true believer that sometimes, whether right or wrong, people won't respond until you start messing with their pocketbooks, right? And so they knew that they could not get like COVID dollars, right?
Yeah.
Unless they had a plan, right? And so they had to come up and be innovative, with that. Okay. So when we look at K-12, I think it's important to understand that the transformation and things that they're doing now as a result of the pandemic was because innovation was forced upon them, right? And they had to do it, and they had to meet certain requirements in order to get funding. So then that's when you started to see the rollout of come to the school and pick up the hot spots, got, what I mean, and all the other devices that came along with it as well. But that's what it is. And for me personally, just like everybody else, you had to figure out new ways to adapt and be innovative as well. I mean, for myself, as teaching at the doctoral level, many programs at that time were, in face-to-face formats and things like that, and you had to deliver, but, it wasn't the same kinds of issues as much like what we saw in K-12, because, I'm working with a different population, mainly a working population that's in the program, but we still had to be innovative, of course, to make sure the delivery of instruction went on. So I think when I look back on this time period, and what it means for education, people had to figure out, how to do things differently that was with the current time. And I think the resulting impact of that, kind of what we see in the workforce with, people not wanting to come into office and things like that. Now you see a similar effect in education where people like, well, we don't have to meet like we used to anymore, right?
Right.
We all can be in our locations and still, make things happen, as well. So I think, even though it was a period of, great sickness and all of those things that went along with it, it was also a great period of innovation that went along in the education field because it was forced to, because we know education a lot of times is the slowest to move in a lot of things as well. So. So that's how I respond to that question.
Have you found that those changes and innovations have been sustained now that schools are opening again?
Mm.
Some have, yes, but many places have reverted back to how we used to. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because in times of comfort, right, people refer to comfortable, right? But in times of pandemic and things like that, you revert to doing what I have to do to make it work, right? So
Yeah.
you see, like in education, the push to get everybody back in the building, and let's get back to quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
When normal can mean backwards in many places. So those innovation pieces and access pieces that were made for many students. Unfortunately, a lot of that has gone away in some facts, in some ways. But you still have other places that are, staying on top of the innovation and making it move forward as well.
Mm.
So I think, it just depends on what scope of the education you really kind of zone in on. But one thing that has not stopped is the access is definitely not equitable.
Yeah.
By no means.
Let's talk a little bit about the advanced placement gap. A report by Education Trust found that Black and Latinx students experienced inequitable access to advanced coursework programs like advanced placement, dual enrollment, and international baccalaureate. You've conducted research in this area, so can you share your research with our listeners?
Yeah, great question. So just to give a snapshot on my response to that question, when we look at students, particularly students in urban educational settings, low income settings. Oftentimes, the narrative which drew my attention to this line of research was that many of these students did not have an interest in pursuing these advanced level courses, right? So whether it's, IB and all the other things you name, dual enrollment and, advanced placement, so on and so forth. And, that really caught my attention from the standpoint of, you know, false narratives kind of catch my attention quickly. And so in education, in thinking about my own experience, even though I went to the school that I went to, externally it had a negative connotation, but internally you had some dedicated educators as well. Okay.
Right.
But in this conversation, based on this question, right? What usually happens, unfortunately, is the onus of this issue falls directly on the student level. Okay, and it's not necessarily a student issue. So when I think about when I was in high school, which I thought about, which prompted me to go in this line of research, making good grades, having college aspirations. But one of the things I found based on my address and what school I was zoned to, I didn't know it at the time, right? But now I know that we were limited in what was offered to us based on the address, the school address, and the resource allocation that was tied to that building, right? And so in coming back to your question then, as we look at that, now what has happened is that I explain to people, how is it that two students can be valedictorians in the same school district, right? Different schools, right? But the valedictorian of the school where the advanced placement courses are not offered, okay, would not be admitted to the flagship public institution of the state, right? So I'm talking public K-12 school to public flagship university in the same state. I'm not talking public to private, I'm talking public to public. And because when you look at, and this is based off of research that I did with one of my colleagues, Dr. Ivory Tolson, we actually wrote report looking at the admission requirements of the flagship institutions in each state and what they require. So let's say, you need 4 credits of English. In science, you needed, this course, and this course. In math, you needed these particular courses. But what happens if your school does not offer it, right? That's not a student issue, right?
Right.
And then so in writing that report, which raised some alarms, which was the purpose, right? Many school districts responded and said, well, we would allow, these students to take the course at another school. And so we asked the question, well, how does that work? Right. Right. Some schools districts said, well, they can get on a bus and go over to another school. I said, well, if they get on a bus, what happens to the classes that they're already in? Right. So I had a whole bunch of questions, so I was ready. Right. But then they said, well, students could take some of the advanced placement courses online. And I said, again, right, what if the school does not have a computer lab or devices, for the student to take the class, right? So it was really more of a system issue or a real educational inequity issue. So based off of the student's address, basically it had a pathway or not if the student was going to be quote unquote college ready for the flagship institution of the state. And the reason why we use the flagship public institution of the state is because these are the universities that each state holds in high regard. Okay, so like in Pennsylvania, Penn State, right? So then if a student is graduating as valedictorian, but they don't have the courses at their school to be admitted to Penn State, that's not their fault, right? And so they're only taking the classes that are available and achieving at a high level. So when we look at this line of research that we're doing is really to not only raise the alarm, but really force schools to address from a policy standpoint, how are you going to deal with this and make sure these students have access to these higher level courses? Because as competition gets higher to get in these institutions, then you're systematically putting these students at a disadvantage based off of a system issue, not an effort issue for the particular student. So when now I pair this valedictorian at this school with another person who has calculus and trigonometry and all of these things, and the highest class that they had at their school was geometry, right? Then, it's just not a fair competition, as well. So the research in this area of work was to kind of start a national conversation for the schools that did not have these course offerings to make sure that school districts kind of live up to what they're supposed to and provide students with access to courses, whether it's, combining with another school or hiring enough personnel, at that particular school to make it work in an equitable way. So that line of research brought me to kind of like what I said in the earlier portions, Dr. Beecham, was based off of my story in high school, knowing that, being from Louisiana, that when, I applied to LSU and and Southern, at the same time, the note I got from LSU is that you don't have the courses, right, to get into, the university, as well. So all of that, fed into that line of inquiry around advanced placement courses, because so many students, even to this day, are shut out from opportunities as a result of that, as well.
And again, I think you highlighted it there that this is when we talk about systemic issues, inequity issues in education. Here's one that I think you said it best: is this is not an effort issue. This isn't. There's nothing to do with the student. I mean,
Mhm.
you're really a victim of geography
Yeah,
and just built-in inequity into the system. Because if your school doesn't offer international baccalaureate or they don't offer advanced placement courses, or your grading C only goes to 4.0,
right,
and the other school is going to 4.2 or
right,
4.1,
right,
then you're right. They got all kind of different legs up, and
right.
so that's
And it carries on to, higher education aspirations. So, when they're trying to, admissions counselors are looking at their
mhm,
profile, they're like, well, I don't know if they could make it here. I
right.
mean, but hey, they just weren't given the opportunity to take the same courses and get the same kind of resources that other students, had as well. So we see it, across the education pipeline, as well.
All right. Thank you.
Do you think that there's an opportunity now with the innovation that happened during the pandemic with so many people learning to teach online, that maybe that can be an opportunity to close that gap where maybe schools, maybe there's two or three high schools in a school district and they can't all have college level English as a course, but maybe one of them can teach it, and then the other high schools can um, log in virtually and participate virtually.
Yeah, and that's what innovation can do nowadays, and going back to my earlier comments, you know, but we still have to be cognizant of the assumption of everybody has equal access to take that course, right? And making sure students do have access to the course, and then working through the logistical items like when will that course be offered,
Right.
and how do you fit that in the school day, across,
Yes.
multiple schools. But I think one thing I've learned from education is that if there's a will to do it, it can be done. But um, education, just like many other sectors of society, is not important unless it's evaluated, right? And if it's evaluated and reported in such a way where it's kind of like in a public forum, then people, tend to not give their full attention to it as well. So it has to be a will and a driving force to say for let's just say a school superintendent to say, I'm gonna make sure that in this school district, all the students have equitable access to advanced placement courses, right? But
Mm,
usually that doesn't come without some kind of pressure
mm,
associated
mhm,
with it to
mm.
even address that issue, as well.
Yep.
So it appears that some of the issues around educational inequity begin with teacher preparation programs at colleges and universities. What changes need to occur to help prepare teachers, educators in ways that support diversity and educational excellence?
Oh yeah, I can go all day on this one, but just for time purposes for tonight, I'll give you two main areas that I see. So one in teacher preparation, a big component of that is coursework, and another big part of that is kind of field placement
Mm,
experiences, right? So I'll start with the coursework piece. So when you look at the undergraduate or teacher preparation programs in the prescribed curriculum, the courses that many times that these students take oftentimes don't necessarily prepare them for the realities of the school, right?
mm,
So you have the normal methods courses, how to teach content, so on and so forth. But then there's a unique perspective where each and every year school districts are becoming more and more diverse. And most teacher preparation programs may have one course that deals with working with students of color, student diversity, multiculturalism, or whatever is prescribed in that program. So then usually if it is offered, sometimes it's not even required, right? And then so now as you start to look at that, the teacher preparation program that is designed to prepare the students for the reality of where they're going in the profession is not doing their job, in my opinion, in making sure students in teacher preparation program, which according to the data is primarily white female students that are going into the teaching profession, of how to work with students who look different than them. And so now, as you go through that pipeline, these pre-service teachers then enter the latter stages of their teacher preparation program. Usually the places where they go for field placement to get experiences in the school is commonly tied to whoever the teacher preparation program has a relationship with. And oftentimes that is schools where have similar demographics than what the teacher candidates grew up in, right? And then so when you kind of fast forward that, and then now these candidates now graduate and get jobs, and then they take a job at a school which is not like where they grew up, not how they were prepared in the teacher preparation program. And then they face with a reality. Then we have what we have now with, teachers quitting, not lasting 3 years, high turnover rate, and the students with the most diversity that they bring to the table have the highest teacher turnover, right? And the students that need the most also have the highest teacher turnover as well. And this has become because of that systematic issue of what the preparation program is not providing as well. Because remember, I always say people always revert back to comfort, right? So then if they revert back to comfort, if this job is not comfortable, I'm going to quit this and go back to what's comfortable, as well. So I think as you start to look at that particular questions about what teacher preparation programs need to do, they have to do a better job in preparing those students for the realities and how to be effective in diverse environments. Because all of us who go into education, many of us don't say we only want to work with one type of student. Okay. Whoever comes to us, our job is to educate them and prepare them for opportunities as well. But unfortunately, back to the system issue, right? The system is preparing students to teach in one type of setting as well. And that's the curriculum that they're offering, through the experiences that they're giving them as well, which ultimately complicates the issue, for them as well.
Wow, and listening to your comments makes me think about is even reflecting educational leadership. In ed leadership programs,
Yeah.
you're lucky to have a diversity course. Or if in the program I went through, I don't think there was one at the master's level. There was a diversity program. There was a diversity course in the doctoral program.
Right.
Here at Lehigh, we have at the to get a master's here, there is a diversity course, and we have a leading inclusive leadership. It's like a leadership for inclusion course, which we also don't have many of at all.
Right.
And we need to our leaders definitely need to know about special education
Exactly.
and inclusion issues.
Yes,
But
indeed.
but as your listen knows, for our students here, you got to be very purposeful, because there's a way that you can take courses in certain programs where you can avoid, if you didn't really want to go into this topic, you could take courses and avoid it. Whereas many of my students purposefully will take certain courses, several of them in my courses, to get a certain kind of experience.
Right.
that will help and really help deepen their understanding when they do that dissertation, which is probably going to also be related to some type of equity issue.
Right, and that's what I was kind of mentioning earlier, where if there is a course on diversity, they're not requiring it.
Mm,
Is more of an elective if people have an interest in, but that's not the reality of when they graduate. What's waiting on them in the education workforce, as well. So those are the types of kind of systematic issues that we have to continue to address, if we're going to improve the education profession.
Now, Dr. Lewis, the next question was supposed to be: Can school leaders, what can school leaders do to close the achievement or opportunity gap? But actually, I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you. This is off the cuff question.
Yeah.
Listen, every once in a while we do one of these, but it's
Yeah.
related. Kind of based on what you were just talking about. There's been a public, very very public debate on critical race theory,
Yeah.
which has morphed into how we teach certain histories, what gets taught and what does not get taught.
Mhm.
Maybe you can give your thoughts on what has happened in the state of North Carolina, and how this controversy is impacting teachers in your state and what's being done about it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the current state of education and what's going on, I mean, North Carolina is typical of what we're seeing, everywhere else in the country, where one, when you kind of listen and look at the kind of public kind of rhetoric around the topic, at the end of the day, most people don't even know what CRT is at all, right? But they just kind of caught the wave of, I just know we don't want it.
Mm.
I don't know what it is, but it just sounds like I don't want it, right? And so once people are tied into that, it's hard to convince people. So then when you go and kind of examine that from a kind of an intellectual space, then what it does for any person that is an education advocate and want to make sure that students have a full kind of educational experience, and diversity and things of that nature, it really pushes them in the corner from a policy, structural, systematic kind of way, because then there's the fear of retribution and losing the job, right?
Mhm.
So then the educator has to weigh, okay, do I do what I know is right in practice with the potential of losing my job, but then I have a family to think about and I can't lose my job, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
then what ends up happening through policy and initiatives like this, once again, right, who gets hurt the most out of that? Okay. And we see it with most of our students. And so as we look at this, if teachers did not have enough on them, whether it's North Carolina or what we see in Florida or any, state that has taken this on, now teachers are and school leaders are in a place of increased scrutiny over what they were before,
Mhm.
because now you got some people who don't know, I know there's a podcast, who don't know what they're talking about at all, right? Uh, then put it in place to where
Mhm.
they can have the authority to approve lesson plans, lessons, that teachers have to teach. And it's just a dangerous slope that we're going down with that, as well. So, but from if I zone in on like K-12 and teacher ed and things of that nature, um, I think we just have to be very careful of how much you sanitize out of the curriculum because of the ripple effect as well. But it ends up hurting all students, no matter what their background is, as well.
And thank you for answering that question.
Yeah.
Again, it was a slight curveball there, but
Oh, that's okay.
that's the mark of a professional, being able to
Yeah,
to to
yeah, we can handle that.
and again, in recent time, that has been a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I've been talking about it a lot in my classes. I'm going to be asking a lot of our guests questions around that, because I mean, I'm truly concerned about, I mean, not only our kids, because we know who's at the end of that rainbow when we start playing those kind of games, the
Yeah,
populations who are going to get hurt, all kids, but especially certain kids.
yeah,
Um, and I wonder about the chilling effect, as you started to mention, on our teachers and administrators out there who may figure, look, I don't even want to touch it, so we're not going to do anything,
yeah,
um, stifling the kind of educational, freedom, creativity, and innovation, you
yeah,
know, in those areas is problematic. And then the last piece of this is, what does this mean again for our sort of our educational democracy?
yeah,
Is is almost like we're kicking out the foundations, you know, and I said this in a piece that I did for Lehigh. Education is the key to the democracy. I mean, it was the so-called founding fathers who talked about the idea of, you need an educated populace,
mhm,
because you got to go to that voting booth and you got to be educated. And,
right,
and in their words, you got to know the difference between the authentic politician versus the demagogue, or somebody who's trying to trick you.
right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
and that it all starts with, a solid foundation in education, but that education has to have the freedom to educate, as you were saying, it's our ABCs and 1 2 3s, but it's this social content also, who
right,
we are, where we come from, everybody's stories.
right,
And the problem, and it's a problem if we start to, because what this has become is a way to stifle certain stories, your story, my
yeah,
story,
yeah,
her story. We're going to stifle certain stories in the way that we talk about that, and allow others. Oh, and by the way, we're going to ban some of these books too,
yeah, yeah.
just for good measure.
Right. And as you look at, when you look at all of that in kind of totality, right? And you kind of think about, so for an educator, be like, so why am I going to subject myself,
Mm,
you know, to this? Like,
mm-hmm.
I don't have anything else to do, as well. But now I'm dealing with, this public committee
Mm,
to get their stamp of approval on what I'm teaching, and I'm the professional in the room. You know what I mean?
yep.
So,
Mm,
I mean, I would equate it to, a doctor doing surgery, where, he or she has to ask the public, is it okay for me to do this kind of surgery? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So, but I think all of that is just goes to show, particularly at K-12 in many of the states, just kind of given the laws of, how you can really tap into that and try to control it, as well, because they know that, particularly the workforce that's in that, their hands are tied,
mm,
as well. So, it's an issue that we definitely have to continue to monitor, as well. But I think in how we prepare school leaders and teachers will need to change to factor that
mm-hmm.
into that. And so what is the workaround where you can still get to the
Yep.
goals of what we're charged to do,
Yep.
uh, but not putting your workforce in a compromising situation? And I think that's the new
Mm,
challenge for preparation for school
mm,
leaders and teachers.
mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you for that tangent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you think that that is one of the contributing factors to teachers leaving the profession? I've been reading different articles where there's a
Mm,
significant teacher shortage in different school districts across the country. And it seems more, I don't know if it truly is, but it seems more a higher shortage now post pandemic than before, or maybe even during the pandemic. Do you think all these different issues, not only teaching and, doing what you're trained to do, but also all these political issues weigh on teachers and they go, hey, you know what? I think
Right.
I'll do something else.
Right. Yeah. And the answer is yes. From the standpoint of when you look at many of these educators now, you only have a certain threshold of what you can deal with because you still have life going on, post pandemic, family needs and all of that. So the reason why I say it is a factor is because when educators take their jobs, they know what the money situation is, the salaries, and
Mhm.
things like that.
Yes.
But oftentimes, when they decide to leave, it's not a money issue, right?
Mm.
Because they knew what that was and they agreed to it, as well. Of course, you're gonna have a fraction of it that say, okay, I moved from one school district to another to get the $10,000 raise. But at the end of the day, they know what the money is, but that kind of public, embarrassment, undermining the profession,
Mm.
not recognizing all what I have to deal with anyway, and then you're adding things like this on, it's just a whole another stressor that people are just not willing to take on anymore. Especially knowing they have options where a teacher can
Mhm.
jump in the corporate world, and make more or have another job easy, as well. So people are checking all of their options, and people are not dealing with all that kind of stuff anymore.
It's a shame, in coming from uh, you know, uh, Latin American background, in many Latin American countries, teachers are highly
Mm.
respected.
Yes.
They're respected the same level of doctors, lawyers, accountants. And
Right.
then here in the United States, it seems like there's a lack of respect for the profession and for the knowledge that teachers have. And I
Yes.
don't know any other profession in the here that you have to have so much education, but yet are questioned so often. And
Yeah.
maybe there are, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly
Mhm.
right. So and all of that factors into people's decisions of, what I'm going to deal with or not, on the job, especially when I have so many other options that I could do. I mean, there's only so much a person can
Mhm.
take,
Yeah.
as well. So
So how, and this is for both of you, I guess, how can we attract more teachers into the profession and more teachers of color into the profession?
well, attracting to the profession, I think it starts multi-layered because, in my view, this is just my opinion, education is, as a whole, has not done a very good job in recruiting people to the profession. And I'll use another analogy to kind of make my point. Like in athletics, if a college identifies a person that has talent, what I mean, they're going to identify them starting at middle school, right? Offering scholarships and things of that nature because I see talent, right? In our education world, whether it's teacher preparation programs or in many cases school district, even though they've gotten a little more aggressive, but we just wait to see who applies. Right. I mean, that's our recruitment. I mean, we may send some people out to the job fair, what I mean, and sit at a
Mhm.
table, but even then we're gonna sit at the table and see who walks up. Right. And so recruitment has to take on a different kind of way. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think as we look at that, we have to do a better job in recruiting, whether it's teacher preparation or as working professionals in the business as well. But also, I think there's a lot of people we overlook as well in many schools and districts across the state. You have many paraprofessionals that are there right inside of those
Mhm.
buildings that are not really tapped to, you know, to receive a pathway to a degree. and a certification. And I think that's an enormous group of people that have a heart for education, are usually the most diverse individuals in the building, right?
Hmm.
And have a relationship with many of the students and the community that are
Yep.
right there as well. So I think, if we're going to do recruitment, the lowest hanging fruit is already in the building
Hmm.
as well. We just have to provide a pathway for them to get there as well.
And I can speak to leadership and to what extent do we tap into our teachers to get them to be school leaders? Because in many cases they're looking at the leader and they're like, look, why do I want to take on that much work, that much headache,
Right,
deal with the community, deal with the central office?
right,
I might as well stay in the classroom. I
right.
mean, but so in certain way, in the ways that we talk about leadership, I mean, we got to get people to understand. This is why Cornell West, we've run into him several times,
Yeah,
but Dr. West talked about it. If you want to lead the people, you got to love the people. So you got
yeah,
to really tap into that love for the community, and really tap into those teachers, the ones who really have the potential,
yeah,
because you can see it in them.
yeah,
And sometimes you got to get people to see the things in themselves that they may not be able to see at that time.
right.
They've got the raw material. All they need is the nudge, to move them forward into that prep program and to get them to believe, because they can believe it. If they can believe it and achieve it in their classroom, there's a good chance, not a guarantee, but it's a good chance you can do that in a building too.
Yeah,
And you can, it's in convincing them that, you can impact more than just your classroom. You can impact this entire building, and through that, impact the community.
yeah,
Um,
exactly right.
but we've got to, so again, and another way to do that for us as leadership prep programs, just like Dr. Lewis was saying, tapping into your paraprofessionals, we can build specific cohort programs, gathering folks together. Because the other problem is, you come into these programs and you just feeling like, I'm feeling it's just me.
Yeah,
I don't have a community around me to go through this, anybody with me. But when we put together diverse cohorts of folks, now I got people to bounce my ideas off of. I don't feel isolated. We're going
right.
through this thing together. And then the bonus you get out of that is, once they all graduate and they all start getting positions, they've got a built-in network where they can
That's right.
continue to support one another. So I think we've got to do those kinds of things to make this is how we make leadership also more attractive.
And I think along that fact, even with those paraprofessionals, this is my beef with the university, is that
Mm,
where these paraprofessionals, if they were to come to our program in cohorts, kind of like I said before, we always want them to come to us, right?
right.
Same classes could be offered on site in the school district buildings.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at that comfort zone, I mean, you got, 30, 40, 50, 60 people right there that are going through. Why can't the course just be offered in those school district buildings, where the cohort is, versus, some of them having to drive an hour or two, for a program. And a
Hmm.
lot of times, some people just cannot do that because of, life situations, as well. But those are things that could easily be done, but, I think those are things that we have to continue to raise to get access for people to be recruited into the profession as well. I mean, you got to make the pathway as easy as possible,
Hmm.
So,
Man, good point.
yeah.
So tell us about the International Conference on Urban Education. How did it originate and where will it be next?
Okay, so
Hmm.
the International Conference on Urban Education, that was a vision I had in 2008 because of, as Dr. Beecham knows, he and I have gone to many of the same conferences. And kind of in my examination of those conferences, I knew what was not being offered
Hmm.
as well. So when we dealt with kind of urban schools, the conversation was really around deficits and what's wrong and how can we quote
Hmm.
unquote fix, the
Hmm.
students, or fix the professionals, or fix whatever the issue was as well, versus a kind of solution based framework around that. So I said, like somebody told me, if it's not offered, create it. Right. so I created it, and as I started to kind of think about it, I kind of sat on the idea for a couple of years, but then I just just one of the things I was called to do, and set it up where I figured out that this wasn't a local issue, where uh, people wanted solutions to these types of things that we're talking about today. So I said, why not create a venue or a situation where people will come with the sole purpose of getting solutions, right? And so as I investigated it further, and knowing it was not a local issue, then meeting colleagues and say, well, that same issue we're dealing with that, here on the other side of the country, we would love solutions for that too, right? I say, okay, it's international. Then meeting some international colleagues and say, hey, we have the same issues too. And it just kind of grew and grew from the idea standpoint. So actually started it, putting the wheels in motion in 2012. And so we actually had the first one in 2014, and we did it in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and then we brought it to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then yeah, and we brought it to the Bahamas, and actually then we had the COVID year. I do it every 2 years, and so actually it was actually last week in Cancun as well. And so each time it has grown and grown. So for example, last week we had over 500 people that registered, across every state, people from other countries. So just actually seeing it from vision to reality of last week. And, I set it up to be a little different than the conferences that we normally go to. I wanted it to be an experience for educators because of how hard they work in their, individual settings. So I wanted it to be an experience. So set it up to always be at an international location where people want to come. Also set it up where situations where they come to a nice place and it's all inclusive. So kind of help from the budget standpoint. So it has built up enough, even like when I went to San Juan, Puerto Rico, the hotel where we had it wasn't an all-inclusive, but given the amount of people that we were bringing, negotiating situations like that with those hotels. But also I wanted where people can bring family and friends, what I mean, as well. So as part of the experience, why can't you come to a conference, what I mean, and get what you need, be done at a decent time so you can still enjoy, the evening and take in the destination as well. So I've set it up as an experience for people. So like last week, even though we had like about 500 something registered, we had about 1,500 people that came because of, because of family and friends, checking in the hotel, as well. So I'm very proud of that as well. And so each time, we look at different specific locations of what we're going to do as well. And the conference, the biggest question they wanted to have answered was, where will it be next? Right. And so I can't reveal tonight where it will be next.
I was going to say, where will it be next?
I know we're live, what I mean, but I got a plan for the reveal, as well. So I've been watching how people reveal stuff. I try to stay on the pulse of everything. So I got a big reveal plan on where it will be, as well. But it'll be every 2 years. So it'll be in 2024. It will actually be November 7th through 9th. 2024. And I'll say what I told the people last week. It will be in a place where it's water, it will be all inclusive, and it will be at a place where people want to go.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
And
that's
warm,
all right.
right?
And warm. That's right.
Oh man, that's all right. And
Yeah.
I credit Dr. Lewis as one of the scholars who helped me really think about. I remember we were at a conference one time, and it's AERA, I believe.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said at the table was like, "Man, we got to think about what has not been done. What what's cutting edge, what's new, what's innovative. What are we
Yeah.
not doing?
Yeah.
That's what we got to think about." And I
Right.
remember you had a session at AERA. I think it was called the was it the Unconference?
Oh yeah,
The
the un-AERA.
on a man, and it was packed,
Yeah.
packed. Um, but it's those kind of innovative ideas, and partially that is which pushed me to this format to
Yeah.
say, I'm doing this in classrooms, but is there a way to reach beyond, the classroom and get out to a broader audience? And this is our, one of our vehicles for doing that.
Yeah.
So, I've always kind of kept that with me. And speaking of that, now I know we're running low on time here. What upcoming books or projects are you working on that you're willing to share with our audience?
Okay. Well, I figured you were asking me something about this, so I said, let me give you one for for the podcast. Well, one of the things I'm working on now is based off of some previous research that I did, but I'm a person that I don't take excuses that people say well, right? I always try to figure out something well. And so I zoned in on teacher preparation programs and their lack of teacher candidates of color, right? And, since I mentioned earlier about the lack of recruitment into teacher preparation programs, one of my lines of research was focused on recruiting, African American male teachers as well, because I knew the power of, what they did for me, but I also knew based off of the research that many students around the country can go their entire K through 12 career and not have a African American male as a classroom teacher. They may see them as a school leader, coach, or what have you, but as a classroom teacher, that wasn't the case. So one of the things I'm working on now, based off of what I did at my previous institution, was writing a book now on how teacher preparation programs can partner with athletic programs on their campuses, because the normal rhetoric is we can't find any. And my solution is, but they right on your campus, right? In the athletic
Right. Wow.
right. And what I found on that side in the many athletic departments, those students of color who are playing football, basketball, or what have you, oftentimes the the athletic department advises them on a college major that is athletic friendly. I use that word for the podcast, right? It's athletic friendly. So I noticed when I examined, in today's language, the Power Five schools, Power Five schools and the Power Five conferences, that as I looked across the athletic programs at each institution, I would see that, for this example, the African American males, 90% of them will all have the same major, right? And so I said, clearly 90% all of them don't have the same interest,
Right.
especially in the major that's listed, okay, as well. But it was an athletic friendly major. And oftentimes, many of these students think they're going to go pro. That's not the reality, but oftentimes many of them may want to be around the sport or work with others, as well. So then I said, well, education can fill that void. So basically I'm writing what I call the blueprint of how teacher preparation programs can work with athletic programs, because these students are already on scholarship anyway. So education doesn't have to pay for them. They're already on the campus. They can, just do what needs to be done, and you can immediately have more diversity in the pipeline as well. But this writing around all the excuses that will come as a result of that as
Yep.
well, and answering those questions prior to in the blueprint of how it can work since they're right on the campus. So that's what I'm working on now, of increasing the pipeline
Wow.
that way.
That's good stuff. And I'm going to toss something by you here because
Yeah.
there's a couple research projects we have going on. Your list is on the one where we're talking to urban school leaders post COVID, coming out of the pandemic, which is one of the projects. We got one piece published out of that. But there's another one, man, where me and some of our students, we interviewed retired teachers and leaders, school leaders, because this is a population we seldomly tap into. Most of them are African American, and it's just so much lost knowledge that it unfortunately passes away when they become elders and they pass on and become ancestors. But one of the things we did, we interviewed them, and it's just got some rich qualitative research data. But I found out something else along the way. The district my mom used to work for, actually, the whole district closed. It was shut down by the state.
Mm-hmm.
2 districts, mostly African American, were shut down in my home state, which leads me down to and I don't think anybody, there may be a couple of dissertations, but I don't think anybody's done the definitive work on all the parameters around how and why that district closed. So there's fertile research ground here in what constitutes the elements of a death of a school district, we're talking all the schools, everything shut down.
Yeah.
But also the second part of that is not just the writing part. It will make a great documentary.
Yeah.
So my next, my fingers crossed, and Dr. Lewis, you want to funnel some of that money my way. My dream would be and how can we take some of our research projects and move them to the documentary space to reach even a even broader audience? Is my next vision.
Yeah, and I'm along that same line. I think that the documentary is the next kind of dissemination outlet that's important. I mean, I've started that with what I did with the conference, and making many movies and addressing topics. And that's definitely a space I'm going in. So we can talk about that.
Yeah.
I got a crew.
Okay.
I got a crew that could travel.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So yeah, but I do think that is that next frontier to reach the audiences, because I do think about many of the outlets that we are charged to disseminate our work in. Like I tell my students is that depending on your career trajectory, some of them you will have to do because it's just part of what it is. But you have to think of new innovative dissemination outlets like what you all are doing with the podcast, things of that nature to reach a wider audience. And so things like documentaries and kind of bringing these issues to the forefront, I think are going to be very, very important, in dissemination, as well, because we have to, if we're going to make change in doing that as well.
All right, listen, I think we got one more.
Yes. So what is the best part of your job?
Oh, the best part. I go to the mentoring the next generation of students. Right now, my role is primarily teaching in the doctoral program. And so outside of all the work that I do, just that mentoring of students to get them prepared for what we're charging them to do, I think that's the best part of the job, from the standpoint of, when you kind of look at, I've been fortunate enough, Dr. Beecham and I have been doing this long enough to have graduates that then go out to other places, other universities, and, whatever roles that they take on. and it's kind of like you have this family tree, you know, they,
Yes.
you know, and or as my students call it, the Lewis boot camp tree. That's what they call it, right? But you got this tree of persons that you've prepared and put out there, and then see them in their roles and doing what they do. And I think it's funny of, you know, once they graduate and go out, and I see some of the things that they're doing and, you know, things that they're mentoring their students to do. And I say, well, you didn't want to do that when I told you about that, but, you know, that's another, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? But I think that's the best part of the job is just, you know, seeing people, their growth and how they evolve into, you know, leaders in the field of education, you know, as well. You know, so I would say that would be my top part.
And
Me
Dr. Lewis,
too.
yeah,
Me too. That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
My kids call it my other children because I'll be in the supermarket and I'll see a student and they'll be like, I remember when you helped me and this is what I'm doing. And I'm so proud when I hear what students are doing. I'm like, yes, you know. Exactly. And my children go, oh, that's just mom's other kids.
Right. There you go. There you go. There you go. Exactly. Exactly. So
Dr. Lewis, I've got look. Well, I think I may have to teach 2 doctoral courses next semester. So I may actually lean on you to come in and possibly talk in one of those classes with regard to you know, a little bit about the doctoral program and a little bit about your research, because I think the students probably could really benefit from what you're saying.
Well, man, you know, I'll do anything for you, man. You know, since we go way back, you know, as well. You know, so.
And let me know if you ever need me to do the same. I'd be more than happy to speak to any audience any audience who's willing to listen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Consider it a deal. We'll do a 1-and-1.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah. All right. So, look, we won't take up any more of your time, man. We just so very much appreciate you just carving out a little space for us and really just benefiting our audience with your knowledge, your experience, all the things you've got going and will be doing. We're just proud to give them a chance to have those highlighted here.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And if I could make one request, whenever the podcast is ready, just share the info with me, and I'll shoot it out from my end, you know, as well to different audiences, and we continue to get the word out as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, we will. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in for another episode here of Education for the 21st Century. Next time, our guest will be, well, that's a surprise. You have to tune in when the next episode is out, but be on the lookout, folks, because we will continue to bring you the very, very best in educational innovation, excellence, equity, and all that good stuff. So for Yalitza, for Dr. Lewis, we will see you next time.